60 years after the original Freedom Riders headed to New Orleans from D.C. to fight segregation, modern-day Freedom Riders are on the road again, this time marching to the nation's capital and rallying communities to demand more action on voting rights. Organized by Black Voters Matter, the week-long event is intended to draw attention to voting rights and to send a message to lawmakers that the fight continues. Part of the journey entails marching near Senator Mitch McConnell and Joe Manchin's D.C. residence. Earlier today, President Biden laid out his administration's next steps after a procedural vote on the voting rights bill failed in the Senate on Tuesday. Listen.
I'm going to be going around the country, spending time making the case to the American people that this just isn't about showing an identification that this is who I am when I vote. This isn't just about whether or not, you can provide water for someone standing in line while they're waiting to vote. This is about who gets to judge whether your vote counted after it's been cast. This is the sacred right to vote. As John Lewis said, it is the most important right you have. And so I'm going to be making the case across the country.
Joining me now is co-founder of Black Voters Matter, LaTosha Brown, who is in Manchin country in West Virginia. LaTosha, how are you?
I am well. It has been a full day. And it's beautiful. Just the people of West Virginia have just been outstanding.
So that's what I was very interested in hearing, because, the original Freedom Riders faced, terror and violence and hostility every inch of the way when they were making their way south. That has not been your experience. What has been your experience?
It's very interesting. We know that the work that the Freedom Riders, part of the reason why we want to do this and actually give homage to the original Freedom Riders, because instead of, as you all know, most people may know that the riot was started up north and it was going down south and was to end in New Orleans. But the violence had been so intense that they actually made a call that Jackson, Mississippi is really where it kind of stopped and never really fully went to New Orleans as they envisioned it. Well, we started our voting rights, our freedom tour for voting rights down in New Orleans. We started in New Orleans as the pre-launch with three of the original Freedom Riders with us in New Orleans, and then we moved up, going through the states the same exact route. We actually made a stop in West Virginia because we think that West Virginia now is on the map because of Senator Manchin. That at the end of the day, what we're seeing is a hold up on the Rights Act, not just on the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voter Advancement Act, but also the filibuster. Folks may or may not remember that in 1963, one of the demands that was being made around the March on Washington was around the end of the filibuster. The filibuster has been used as a tool to stop civil rights legislation. And we're saying that whether it is temporarily or some permanent fix, that we need to end the filibuster. And so as we've been going around to communities, we've been going to urban areas, we've been going to Nashville and Jackson and Birmingham and Raleigh and all of those places that we know on the route, but we've also been going to small communities like Cuba, Alabama. Yes, there is a Cuba, Alabama, and Columbia, Tennessee, and Rock Hill, South Carolina. And today we went to Berkeley, West Virginia. And what has been the most outstanding experience for me is how people have been responding in those rural areas, that we've been having white and Black folks to come out and Latino folks and indigenous people to come out and meet us at various stops. And the same message we hear, people are frustrated with the politics that are happening, that literally they want to see people over politics. In West Virginia, what's really interesting about West Virginia is that it's not that many Black folk here, right? And we're Black Voters Matter. It's 3% of the population. Joe Manchin won his last election by 3%. And so what we're saying is that 3% has had an impact on him winning his election. And so they've been saying that the people of West Virginia say they got something to say, that overwhelmingly in the state, both Republicans and Democrats and people who don't claim a party affiliation, but they also are voters in this state, overwhelmingly support the For the People Act.
Let me ask this question. I mean, I know that you guys are bringing try to shine a light on this issue. I'm sure it is, as you just described, just enlightening for both the people you meet and for the people who are taking part in the freedom rides. But what effect do you think that you'll have in D.C. in the way that senators vote, including and probably especially Joe Manchin?
You know, what we've seen in this country is oftentimes when you're thinking about, when we're trying to move legislation in regards to Black folks, we've had to apply pressure. The truth of the matter is, while we lift up the legacy of LBJ of signing the civil rights legislation, he also called Dr. King and said, this isn't the time. He didn't necessarily, wasn't running to sign it. He wasn't interested. But what wound up happening when people organized themselves and they start gaining momentum, and what we saw when they started seeing the images of what happened in Selma on the Edmund Pettus Bridge when people were beaten, that it created a different kind of frame. It created a different kind of public outcry they had to respond to. And so our belief is that part of who's going to have to take leadership on this, people in communities, the people that we've been seeing, the people we've been meeting with. We're coordinating and organizing with over 40 organizations, national organizations, that are mobilizing their people either to come to DC or literally apply pressure. And so it is not, it's not something that is awkward to see someone like Manchin not support the Voting Rights Act. We've got to apply pressure to make them do right.
You bring up an interesting point, which I have always noted about history, which is that, real tragedy has often been the spur, right? That it was the images you just described of real brutal violence in the South that spurred a lot of people to change their minds and to support a Civil Rights Act. It was this assassination of Dr. King that got the Fair Housing Act across the line. It shouldn't take that much. It shouldn't take that sort of violence. And I'm trying to figure out what is it that can be done short of that. Like what kind of pressure can be applied that doesn't require the catalyst of tragedy? What do you
I think
think?
that's a great question. I think it's a great question, but I also want to say that, while it may not be concentrated in the same kind of way, that we are being attacked. We're seeing acts of violence and we're being attacked every single day. We've never seen the kind of sweeping attack on voting rights since the 60s that we're seeing now. In 47 states, we actually have an attack on the voting rights. We're literally seeing white supremacy rear its head. We're seeing attack. We're seeing in many of these places, even where we've seen police brutality or we've seen the murders of unarmed Black folks every day in and day out. At one point, I was afraid to hold up my phone to see another person, to see another video of an unarmed Black man or woman who had been shot by the police. The truth of the matter is the visceral reaction, the violence, the applied violence, oppression in our community it may look different, but I don't think that it's ended. And in many ways, what I think Trump did, the former president, Trump did, is that he literally opened up the floodgates around making mainstream white supremacy mainstream again. And so what we're seeing is attacks, even the work that we've been doing on the ground. I can give you stories how when we went to Ohio, the trash can of our Airbnb was caught on fire. We had to go get security. Mm-hmm. I can tell you about how on January the 6th, Cliff and I, who are both co-founders of Black Voters Matter, we got a phone call from the FBI and had to leave from our homes. My point is that this racial hatred that is in this country has not been uprooted. And so what we've got to do, the difference, I do think, Charles, is that this is one of the elections that what we're seeing in the last 2 years, that young folks, that the electorate is shifting and changing. And so I do believe that creates a different kind of opening.
I hope so, LaTosha. And I have to go now. But I really want to thank you for your activism, and stay safe on that bus and on that freedom ride, and make it safely to DC. Thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you for having me.